This is, as I said, this is part of our Green Speaker series, which began in 2012. We've done over a dozen of these free public lectures. That's helped in my view to inform the public about really important issues impacting the environment in Windsor Essex County. I want to thank our panel tonight. All of the folks here are experts and have done a significant amount of work on the issues that we're going to be discussing here this evening from a variety of different perspectives. Some are local, some aren't. For those of you that made the trip through rain and perhaps other weather, stiff winds and whatnot, thank you very much for plowing through all of that and making it here safely. The way that we're going to organize the evening is we're going to give each of our panelists the opportunity to come to the podium and offer their perspectives with respect to the issues at hand, road mortality. And so they'll each get a certain amount of time to speak. We'll have a bit of a panel discussion afterwards, and then folks will have an opportunity to ask questions of the panelists themselves. So with that, I know nobody's here to see me, so let's just get right into the panels themselves. We're going to start with Jonathan Choquette. I think most people here in the room would know Jonathan. Jonathan is Wildlife Preservation Canada's lead biologist for the Ojibway Prairie Reptile Recovery Program. He has over 10 years of academic, volunteer, and professional experience working with reptiles and amphibians. He's completed contracts for Environment Canada, Huron Stewardship Council, and the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry. He served as a volunteer board member for the Canadian Herpetological Society from 2014 to 2017, and is a member of the Society for Conservation Biology. Wow, you've done a lot, Jonathan. Jonathan's currently pursuing a PhD part-time at Laurentian University on the use of conservation translocations as a tool to recover Massasaugas. So without further ado, Jonathan.
Studying road mortality in the Ojibway Prairie since 2010. So tonight I'm going to tell you a little bit about my research. I'm going to talk about some solutions to addressing the road mortality problem, and I'm going to give you a bit of an overview of some of the projects that have been implemented here in our Ojibway Prairie, which we know is a very significant ecosystem. The Ojibway Prairie has been bestowed by us a number of designations over the last 60 years, and it's an important attraction locally. We receive about 100,000 visitors every year at this location to explore the Ojibway Prairie. And we've invested a significant amount of public dollars into this system. And unfortunately, that investment is being degraded on a regular basis by a number of stressors, road mortality being an important one that we're going to talk about tonight. And that's because there are some high traffic roads that bisect this system, and these roads result in a number of issues for wildlife, including habitat fragmentation, habitat degradation, and road mortality. So roads connect people and cities, but roads disconnect ecosystems and wildlife. So I wanted to know back in 2010 the nature and extent of this problem at the Ojibway Prairie, and so I started a study with some partners and asked the following questions: which species are being killed? What are the road mortality rates locally? And where and when does most road mortality occur? And this study was eventually published in the Canadian Field Naturalist, and you can go and check out our study at their website. And so how do we do this? We did a systematic road mortality study on 7 major roads that cross through the complex, and we surveyed these roads 3 times a week. And we did it by bicycle. And we focused on the main collector and arterial roads that bisect this system. You can see them here on this map. We recorded every vertebrate found dead on road and took detailed photos, particularly for species at risk. And we analyzed that data in a program called SERIMA to look for the clusters or hotspots of road mortality. We recorded over 2,000 dead animals, 49 different species, and we were doing a particular focus on reptiles. And of the 446 reptiles we found, we had 1 snake dead on the road for every turtle, so more snakes being impacted by turtles. And we did find 7 different species at risk that are being impacted by road mortality in our local landscape. and 3 in particular that are feeling the brunt of the impact. So that's the eastern fox snake, our biggest snake, the Butler's garter snake, and the snapping turtle make up most of the road mortality observations that we saw. And we estimate that on average 19 individuals of the species at risk are being killed every month in the complex. That's about 114 per year. And interestingly, when we compare the rate of road mortality that we observed here compared to other published reports across Ontario, we have one of the highest rates of snake road mortality in the province. That's quite shocking. If anybody knows a higher rate, let me know. I tried to find one and I couldn't find one. We also found out where clustering is happening. So we found out where those road mortality hotspots are. And on 4 of our study roads, we have hotspots, which is interesting. It's in close proximity to the hydro right-of-way. Where the hydro right-of-way crosses each of those 4 main roads, we have road mortality hotspots. And actually, half of the species at risk we found killed were within those hotspots. The other half dispersed across the other roads. And since we published our study, we've continued to monitor road mortality locally. We have in our database over 400 species at risk killed. With this year, it's probably closer to 500. So the problem continues. It hasn't gone away. And the majority of that mortality has occurred on Malden Road in particular, but Malden and Matchett together make up about 70% of our road mortality records. And this is for Gord Henderson. Is Gord Henderson in the room? he didn't believe us, so I made sure that we collected every single dead snake we found dead on the road over the last 2 months, and this is what 178 snakes, dead snakes looks like. It's pretty shocking. I actually just took these pictures last night, and I've never seen them all together right there, but oh, it's time for the dance. And this is actually...
Not me, it's
So quite shocking to see, this is only for 2 months. That includes 40 species at risk of fox snakes and Butler's garter snakes. So it's important that we intervene to address this problem for a number of reasons. One, that species at risk have legal protection in Ontario. We continue to run them over and kill them. It's our duty to do something about that. Also, we know that even low levels of mortality can result in local extinctions of populations. It doesn't take a lot over a number of years to wipe a population out. And we've lost 1/3 of our reptiles and amphibians in Essex County. And there's another 1/3 that are really rare and on their way out. And Massasoga is a perfect example that we're watching disappear. We have less than 12 of these individuals left here in Essex County. Finally, we should intervene to address road mortality because at the same time we can connect our landscapes. We know we need to connect our parts in order to maintain healthy populations. Protected areas need to be connected. Given that, how can we intervene? There's a number of different ways that we can intervene to address road mortality and connectivity. Eco-passages are something that we're talking about, and things that have actually been installed in our landscape, but eco-passages are not all created equally. We have very large ones, and we can use large eco-passages. In the top of the screen right there, you can see a really big one to link habitats across when there's a big, say, multi-lane highway bisecting habitats, and we want to allow multiple individuals to cross. But then at the other end of the spectrum, we can install smaller eco-passages, perhaps on collector or arterial roads, and we want to put a tunnel under the road and help smaller animals cross the road. So there's a scale of potential solutions when it comes to eco-passages. The important thing, though, regardless of the type that you install, fencing is a must. An eco-passage without fencing is essentially useless. You need to divert the animals to the structure for it to be effective. And of course, your fencing is going to be designed based on the animals that you're trying to direct. A snake can get through a pretty small hole, so you need a pretty small mesh to direct a snake to an eco-passage. But eco-passages have some limitations, and in our landscape particularly there will be limitations. For example, you need to have public land on both sides of the road, and you need that fencing. And in a case like this is a section on Matchett Road. You see the number of driveways highlighted there in red. The fencing just wouldn't necessarily be a viable alternative. So are there other solutions to eco-passages in situations like this? Well, we can look at something called traffic calming. Traffic calming is how we do physical updates to roadways to reduce the traffic volume and the traffic speed. And we can implement traffic calming in addition to eco-passages in places where we want to address road mortality, but where perhaps eco-passages just aren't feasible. And the idea behind this is to reduce the speed and volume of traffic, because we know that traffic density and traffic speed are related to road mortality risk. Finally, I want to talk about where we should intervene. And when we talk about intervening for addressing road mortality, we should also talk about intervening for addressing habitat fragmentation. And connecting habitats and reducing roadkill together, we'll talk about the idea of linkage and connectivity. So I'm going to talk about two major concepts of how we can connect habitats and reduce road mortality within the landscape. So looking at these as linkage concepts, so essentially corridors. I'm going to talk about this thing called the lateral corridor in the landscape here, and this is up at the top here, and then I'll also talk about this central corridor right here in the middle. So this lateral corridor has been proposed by the Earthquake Parkway and is part of the new bridge, and essentially it's the idea that we can connect habitats in the Ojibway Prairie along the perimeter. And the focus here has really been on addressing the major highway barriers that bisect this system. And there's been a couple of advancements and pretty substantial progress that has been made. I'm just going to touch on that quickly to give us an overview of what's been done in the landscape already. And this is pretty amazing. This is a massive eco passage that was built over the Earthquake Parkway back in 2016 with 13 kilometers of fencing to keep animals off the highway and connect habitats here. And at the other extreme, we have a smaller eco passage that was installed along the Earthquake Parkway, just south of the Earthquake Parkway on Matchett Road right there with about 500 meters of fencing. And coming down the pipes here, this was just announced, $1.5 million invested as seed money for another large eco passage, this time over Ojibway Parkway, but still in part, as part of this lateral linkage concept. So you can see Ojibway Parkway right here, this is the Matchett Road project, and that's the Earthquake Parkway project right there. And I want to talk about the other corridor concept right here. This is the idea of a central corridor right through the spine of the Ojibway Prairie Complex. This is something that's been proposed by myself and Wildlife Preservation Canada. And the focus here has been on addressing the major barriers along the collector and arterial roads on the inside of the complex. And this has been developed using road mortality data and connectivity analysis. And so I want to talk about a couple projects that we're pushing forward within this concept. We haven't built anything yet. We don't have as deep of pockets as the MTO does, but we're working on it. And so first thing, we started addressing the road mortality hotspot along Walden Road to test out locations for future fencing and to essentially plan for future eco passage right here. So we've installed temporary fencing over the last few years and achieved some results in reducing species at risk road mortality, but not substantial. The next thing we did was install signage in partnership with the city and the town of LaSalle to identify, demarcate those road mortality hotspots on each of those 4 roads that I mentioned earlier in preparation for future mitigations. In 2018, we actually did inventory along this proposed corridor to identify where the public land was so that we could help us design where we could actually put eco passages. And finally, we've actually developed some preliminary designs for an eco passage here on Walden Road in vicinity to that hydro right-of-way that I mentioned, and then over here on Matchett Road, also in vicinity of the hydro right-of-way. And these 2 eco passages we estimate would cost about $140,000, and we successfully raised this year just over $50,000 to help contribute to these 2 projects. So just to reiterate, that's the proposed project on Matchett Road, and this one is the proposed project on Walden. The other stars being other potential opportunities in the future for additional eco passages or ways to address road mortality. So just to sum it all up, we know the Ojibway Prairie Complex is an important ecosystem. However, we're continuing to degrade its ecological integrity via road mortality and habitat fragmentation. So we could apply eco passages and perhaps traffic calming strategically as part of a landscape scale strategy to address road mortality and increase connectivity. And in theory, that would increase the viability of our wildlife and species at risk populations. Thank you very much.
Okay, so our next speaker is Kari Gunson. Kari is the Principal Road Ecologist for Road Ecologist International, an organization that provides services in planning, designing, and monitoring road mitigation solutions for maintaining ecological processes. Kari's worked for the past 20 years on road ecology projects with both large and small animals in North America, beginning with 6 years of monitoring work on overpasses in Banff National Park from 99 to 2005. Through her various projects, she's provided expertise for design, placement, and monitoring mitigation measures for a variety of animal species. She's now the lead ecologist monitoring a suite of wildlife crossing structures that span 200 kilometers of Highway 69 for both large and small animals in Ontario. Kari, thank you for being with us.
So those pictures there are on Highway 69, and then we'll come to that in a little case study in this talk. So I just wanted to bring your attention to a review that was just completed, and the website for this. You can link right to it from my website, so don't worry about writing that crazy line down. But on there, there's a lot of, we're talking about planning and designing these eco passages and other features that I'll talk about. You don't necessarily have to start from scratch. We're starting to build repositories of stuff so that engineers can, you can modify them to your site, but you don't necessarily have to start from scratch with all these designs, because this could be part of the expensive part. So there are some of these designs. For example, I'll talk about this case study in Vermont, where they have all their features all together and available, downloadable as a PDF. So it's just a matter of going through all the materials that are out there. So that, I would talk more about that study that was done near the end. But essentially, the organization of this talk is formed from the organization of that study and those materials. So there's three major components to mitigation. There is what Jonathan was talking about, you can have traffic calming and other things like that, but the actual features that go on the road to get the animals to cross safely is crossing structures with exclusion fencing. They've worked well for large animals. We're a little bit more advanced with those types of animals. They're a little bit easier to mitigate for various reasons. But the smaller animals, we're trying to catch up. And because of species at risk in Ontario, we've done a lot of work here, and we have a lot of lessons learned that we can draw from, and we should be able to improve from that. So the first component of all of this is that we do have existing infrastructure in our roads, and these are typically called culverts, and they're for hydrology. So we move water under roads. We also move livestock. We also move snowmobiles. We also move people. So we do have structures. So if those structures happen to be in the right place where we want species at risk or turtles or snakes to cross, we can build on those. And what we need to do with them is modify them and adapt them to work for the animals. And some really good structures are creek bridge pathways. So we used to just build these massive bridges over creeks on highways, but we would have sloped riprap rocks where they couldn't cross. They could only cross they could cross within the river through the highway. But now we make little ledges, and they don't have to be that wide, and animals can go through a rocky canyon to cross the road safely, and that's where they're naturally crossing anyway. So those are the kind of things we can do, and they're not so difficult to do because they're there. It's just thinking about the detail. So this is a case study from that repository I told you about at the beginning that was just completed, and one of the case studies was a lot of the work that's been done with drainage culverts and turtles in Ontario. We have shown that 1.2 to 1.8 meter corrugated steel pipes that exist in the roadway, when you add fencing and some guide fencing to bring the animals there, they will use these types of tunnels. There's a little bit of information that we don't know, whether how much water can be in them and the exact size of them, but we do know that 1.2 to 1.8 have been used by turtles, and especially in a study by Kevin in Halliburton in Ontario. He showed massive amounts of turtles going through one culvert, and he also showed that there were species-specific differences in use of tunnels in this one culvert, because he looked at how many turtles were around and how many used it. So that was interesting research. So we're expanding on what we know a little bit. Caverhill did a study in Brantford, Highway 24, where he had a 1.8 and he had a lot of turtles go through too. So there's specific sites that work well for drainage culverts when you add good solid fencing to the site. We can also design designated wildlife crossing structures. Now, it's the same concept, the same thing. We're trying to get them under the road. But with these, you can have drawings that specifically talk about wildlife. You can locate them, you can space them, you can have fencing all drawn in, the installation, excavation. You can design it with the road widening project. You have construction going on, maybe a little bit easier to get them in, maybe a little bit easier to get money to put them in. And when we learn about what they like, when they cross under, with perhaps an open top tunnel, and I'll talk about that in a minute, then we can design them for the actual features, because reptiles are adapted to the environment because they're cold-blooded. They are sensitive to the environment. They cannot be in too hot or too cold for too long. So they need to have a comfortable situation when they're going underneath the highway or over top of the highway. So this is why we designed for reptiles through maybe not knowing whether they would use. We're kind of guessing, but we think that they would like to have the same temperature under the road as where they just came from. So this is where the concept of the open grate comes in. And Dinu will talk more about the open tunnel aspects of these types of tunnels, but there's been research with these tunnels in Killbear Provincial Park and on Highway 69 and the Bruce Peninsula to show that the snakes and the turtles like to use them. But again, it's hard to compare this type of tunnel right here with maybe one that's closed top and know, hey, which one are you going to pick? Because they have to be designed, and we have to get a study that actually does that, and they build them that way. And then we put them right next to each other, and then we can compare. And that's difficult to do, but we're trying to get there with our research. So, on Highway 69, which I'll talk about quickly, I won't have a lot of time, I'll have to go through it very quickly. But with the main thing that we're finding from a variety of dedicated and non-designated drainage culverts under the highway in probably 25 different structures is that turtles tend to go through these tunnels. Most of them are all closed. They don't have the open top. They're just box and round pipes. You'll see pictures. And turtles tend to go through, and they don't turn around and come back out. But snakes are going through, and they're turning around and coming back out. So they seem to be more sensitive to temperature than turtles. So this is what we know. And we also know that from research that we've done on Highway 69, and Colby and other people have shown that the reptiles cross when the temperature is the warmest in these tunnels. And that might not necessarily be the time when they're normally migrating from A to B in the landscape, because they're probably learning to cross under roads when it's the warmest. They don't want to be crossing when it's cold in those tunnels. So this is some examples of the tunnels I've been talking about and what we built for reptiles. This is in the Bruce Peninsula, the open grate with the fencing coming into them. This is Machette Road, where Steve Marks is monitoring to see if Butler's garter snakes are UZs. This is here right here, your area. And then, of course, the overpass with the underpass for snakes that Jonathan talked about at Windsor. Honorable Grade Parkway, is that right? So there's an underpass there because they put a bike path across and they want to navigate the snakes there because there is threat of bike mortality or poaching if snakes are exposed on the road. People might prosecute them and disturb them or do whatever they do. So wildlife fencing, we heard it's very important, it's crucial, but we need good wildlife fencing. We can't have wildlife fencing that has gaps or pools under that they can climb over. So this is a challenge with wildlife fencing, and I will get to the list of challenges that we have with that. Putting these crossing structures in is probably the easy part, even though you have to rip up the road. The fencing has been a challenge for sure. Why do we need fencing? This is just an example for large animals. One study that we didn't have fencing at this underpass to the left, and where we put fencing up 1 year later, and just in one season, we had 7 times more crossing. Large mammals might integrate these tunnels into their migration pathways in 3, 4, 5 years, but we're not quite sure that adaptation period for turtles and snakes, and whether they'll find a little tunnel under the road without that fencing to guide them in. All depends on where it's situated in their habitat, where they're migrating anyway, and those kind of things. But fencing is definitely needed to a certain extent, and how much varies by each site and the habitat. So, barriers. There's a whole bunch of different kinds. We do put up signs. They're much easier to do before you can get to funding mitigation project with crossing structures and fencing. You might put up a sign beforehand. So the fencing we started with, and in some terrains, this is all you can do. Because the terrain is very forested. It's a park where you don't have a lot of the vegetation cleared and a large road shoulder, things like that. So you need to have flexible material. Some landscapes are just straight through. You could put actually concrete waste blocks, and they don't have to be that expensive. This is an example of Vermont, I'll talk about that. But it was only $30 per linear foot for materials and installation. So there are ways to get really good, solid materials into the landscape, and this is a really good example. And then there's a guide wall fencing that we have that can lead them to a actual crossing structure. So this is an example of Animex fencing. This was in Lake Huron area near Primary Provincial Park. This is what the MTO is using on their highways, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And then we have chain link fencing that's quite standard and easy to use. Maybe not so great for snakes. Get through the mesh. Some turtles can climb the mesh, and the snakes can poke through. So these are all things we have to consider when we're looking at what kind of materials we want to use, and that's some of the basic challenges right there. And Steve's mentioned to me that the crayfish in this area, is it crayfish? Yeah. And they make holes, so then the snakes can go through those holes. So you have to think about that, what you want to put under to stop that from happening. And so in Highway 69, they actually, because of the stainless steel rock with their posts, they actually cement each post in 1 meter by 1 meter. And you have 10 kilometers, that can be expensive, but then the posts don't fail after winter too. So it's the amount of money that you put in from the beginning. It's your terrain. You need drainage with roads. On road slopes, you need to be able to provide water flow. The engineers don't like it if there's no water going down into their ditches. That's the way they designed the road. Now you want to put a fence in there. How's that going to work? So there's mowing. They do maintenance in there, and you need to mark the fence so they don't mow over it. There's vandalism. There's access for people. There's all the things you need to consider with your fencing. So with a short fence, such as what we're doing in a lot of places for reptiles, they can be easily impacted by snow removal. And that's the biggest thing we're finding in Canada is a lot of these fences are impacted by snow removal. So what they did in Vermont was they did a concrete waste block material for amphibians, and they had to define the crossing spot about 200 meters each side. So it was completely manageable and feasible to put these blocks in, because it wasn't for kilometers and kilometers. And they have a little fence end, so when the amphibians come here, they may not go onto the road, they might go back where they're supposed to, and there's 200 passes for them to cross. So they have a whole price list, and that project was probably about $400,000, and one group fundraised for it. A group with partners fundraised for that money to put those crossing structures in, similar to what the long play will tell you about, what Rick will tell you about. So this was about 2-3 years ago this was built, so there's very little maintenance. It's working for the amphibians, they're all using the tunnels. There's a little bit of a fence end problem. They would have liked more fencing had they had more money. This is an example of innovation on Australia. They use 2 different kinds of fence. So they have this dug into the bottom. It's actually pinned down there with some kind of pins. I don't have to find out the details. And you can have concrete footings to anchor your fence, and you can put a chain link on top of that to get your height. There's lots of different things that you can do. And they don't have to be that expensive once we get them going routinely into our landscape. So the Highway 401 is an example where they built a taller mesh fence for, it's near Gananoque, near the border, and they integrated drainage. And that's a study that's going on right now, and we're looking at 2 different mesh sizes to see how they work. And I'll show you an example of that. So one's, you can see that mesh, I think one's a 1/4 inch and one's 1/8 inch. They're counting how many snakes poke through. So they're doing those kind of studies to look at which fence works better with the snow removal on a major highway. Does one, because the mesh is bigger, does the snow not impact it as much? And they already installed this at the beginning, and that was a waste of money because it all got blown out with the first snowplow. So we don't want to make these mistakes again and again. We want to do it right. So this is where we're at. So you have to pay attention to detail. Jonathan talked about those access roads. I saw how many access roads there were. Probably not a good idea. I don't think we can get fencing. You got a gap in the fencing. Not much you can do. But if there's 2 or 3 gaps, such as in the Bruce on Highway 6, where they're doing a road expansion, road upgrade project, they could perhaps put a couple of these in. They cross the road. So the animals following, you got some fence there, and they just keep going through the access road. So those are the kind of things they have in Europe. And they tie in their fence in to the rock cliffs. That's Highway 69, Halliburton, and Haven site. He has a really nice fence end, and he found 25% of the turtles went around and back where they were supposed to go and not on the road. So that worked. And then you can have jump outs where the animal that's got on here by accident and might be hit by a truck can now go here and jump down to where it's supposed to be. So those are the kind of details that we have not implemented well in Ontario to this day, and we really need to. We have for large animals, but not for reptiles. And we have to. If you forget about all those little details, and don't put the money in everything else, because it's all of us to work together as a system. So Highway 69, I don't know how much time I have, maybe like 4 minutes?
Sure.
Okay. So these are examples of all the different types of fencing. I've already gone through them. One type of fencing that works well is when you have large animal anyway, and you can attach something on the bottom for the reptiles. So that way you have this framework and structural integrity, and so that the smaller fence does not need posts. So they don't need to be cemented in and everything like that. So you can have a larger chain link, and you can put a solid barrier pond. So there's things to do. And we found about, I think, 30 different crossing structures that we're monitoring, maybe 25 of them. This is how many animals we're finding going through, and they pass through. So we know they would use them. Only we've identified by instinct. And the one thing that is interesting is Massasauga rattlesnakes are in the area. And all the Massasaugas that I've seen going through tunnels or read about have been with a dry substrate. And they're about 1.2 meters diameter in height or width. So that's in the Bruce. They've got quite a bit of data. Kilbear Protection Park and Highway 69. So challenges, I've talked about a lot of them. Compared to large animals, we don't have a large sample size going through these crossing structures, so in 2-3 years of monitoring, we don't have that large of a sample size. We don't know how many animals are necessarily in that wetland to say, have we got a good proportion using them? Are the males and females using them? We want to know more detail that we know with the large animals. And because they're cold-blooded, it's harder to use the camera technology that's affordable that senses by temperature difference and animal going through. And the air moves when they're really big and they're warm, and the reptiles are cold and they're not a different temperature than the ambient environment. They won't trigger our cameras. So we have to use time lapse and things like that. So the fencing, why didn't a really, really awesome fence that NGO invested a lot of money in, why did it work in some places and why didn't it work in others? There's different reasons, and one being that there was no continuity at highway intersections. So they would get through there. Another reason, the jump outs weren't installed that great, and so one had fallen off until now there's a hole in the fence. Another reason is that there's no maintenance. and nobody's filling out these washouts that happen, which would only take one person, one day, 8 hours for 3 kilometers, but nobody's doing it. A car went through the fence and we reported it in May and it's still not fixed. So this is the problem, and why the maintenance isn't happening is a whole nother issue, whole nother talk, and maybe we're not taking it seriously enough, but it has to be done if we're going to do this. When we did maintenance on one of our sections of highway, there was a paper that came out that said that once the reptile fence was built, it didn't work, there was just as many roadkids as before. Then we went in, we did maintenance through our monitoring contract, and we got the road mortality down to 0. So it was adaptive management and maintenance that made it work. So that's what I'm trying to say, but if you do it really well at the beginning, that maintenance of adaptive management is even less. You don't have to rely on it as much. So this is the type of maintenance we do. We put rocks, this kind of thing, just fill in when the water takes it down, you put rocks in because the water moving through. And my last slide, USGS, United States Geological Service, Forest Service, Yosemite National Park, I think it's called the Yosemite Toad. They actually heard about all these fence problems. They had a 200-meter crossing hotspot where these species at risk crossed. They said, well, it's not going to find a little tunnel. We have to put all that fencing in. Let's just raise the road in that 200 meters. So they built a prototype and they installed it, and on all vehicles can get over it. It's to standard of the road and safety and everything else. So for 200 meters, the road's wide enough for the toad to go underneath through these little pillars, and they have very low fencing. And it wasn't, it was probably the same cost as it was to put big, strong, robust fencing in as well. So these are the kind of things we can do in different sites, and we're learning, and hopefully in 10 years we'll be much better off. And I'm just not going to give up, I guess, and hopefully we can integrate this into our highway and road building maintenance processes, and I think that's the biggest issue. I've said most of this. Overpasses need to be considered for reptiles, and we have one in Ontario, Canada, and we have one that was several that were built for small animals in the States and a couple in Europe. So, but this is the only one particularly specialized for snakes in the world, and right here in Ontario. So I think we've done pretty good. So with that, I'm going to leave it to questions at the end.
Okay, so next we have Rick Levick. Rick serves as the coordinator of Long Point Causeway, the Long Point Causeway Improvement Project from 2007 to 2017. His initial involvement in this community-based initiative in road ecology was as president of the Long Point Bay Anglers Association. As coordinator, Rick was responsible for all aspects of the project, including fundraising, project management, financial administration, and communications. He raised more than $2.7 million for the project, which resulted in the installation of more than 6 kilometers of exclusion fencing and 12 wildlife culverts along the causeway. Rick joined the Long Point Biosphere Board of Directors in 2017 and is here with us this evening to talk.
Thank you. First word I want you to see is community-based. We began with a meeting like this, talking about the issues, presentation similar to what Jonathan did, and just said to people in the room, okay, how many people have decided enough is enough, and we're going to do something about this? And that's how we began, and that was way back in 2006. But I'm sure you were all wondering, where the heck is Long Point? A Long Point is that finger stand sticking out into the middle of Lake Erie. Okay, and where's the top buddy? Fancy.
In the middle of the yeah.
The Long Point. So this is Long Point, the inner bay of Long Point, and the causeway is right here at the western end of the bay. Okay, and this area to the west of it is Big Creek National Wildlife Area. So, and most of this is what we call the Long Point or Biosphere Reserve. So, we're right at mentioned, it was beside a national wildlife area. It is, which has a huge biodiversity of plant and animal species, and that's why it's designated such. Long Point is recognized by UNESCO as a World Biosphere. And the causeway is kind of the gateway into the biosphere. And sadly, when we began the project, this was the fourth deadliest road for turtles in North America. So it's time to do something different. So this is an aerial shot of the causeway, and you can see the environment we're kind of dealing with. Okay, we're in the shoreline of Long Point Bay. This is all marshland. And I'll tell you, trying to put up fencing in a marsh is something else in terms of the challenge, the types of challenges Kari was talking about. Significant wildlife road mortality, particularly species at risk. These include spotted landings, northern map turtles, snapping turtles, eastern fox snake, and eastern hognose snake. And I think you have to realize, and this is, we say this, Big Creek, One Lake Prairie, Long Point are safe havens for these and other species in a highly urbanized southern Ontario. And your Ojibway Prairie is a similar situation. Most of the wetlands, 98% of the wetlands in southern Ontario have been drained. If you look at the forest cover of Essex County, it's 2.5%. So these, where these animals exist are where they're making their last stand, okay? And that's why we have to take action, because if these places disappear, they disappear for good. So the Canadian Wildlife Service manages Long Point, and they did studies way back in the late 70s and in the early 90s, probably the earliest studies done on reptile roadkill. And they had some pretty massive numbers back then. You can see the number of species killed. And the reptiles, the turtles made up of most of the reptiles. And you look at numbers and say, well, that's not 200 turtles, right? Well, so that's not too many. Well, if you do that year after year after year, you pretty quickly start running out of turtles. And that's what we had. We studied all the data and put it through some modern analysis, and it basically said that the mortality rate we were seeing in these species, they'd eventually disappear. It was, science basically confirmed the obvious, right? Particularly turtles they're really affected by road mortality because it's often the females who are moving to nesting sites in the spring. So you're basically killing off all your reproductive age turtles. So it has an accelerated kind of impact on the decline of the species. Now I mentioned it was a community-based project. These are all the organizations who had people representing all the various organizations who helped steer this project. We had some people from the various ministries, conservation authorities, but a lot of these are just local organizations, conservation organizations who got on board with this and brought their perspective and their knowledge to our process. So we want to move forward, get a consortium of people together because it brings a lot of expertise and a lot of enthusiasm. Project timeline, we started in 2006. Raised some money and commissioned a study. All this information that Kari presented to you did not exist in 2006. So we thought we were just going to do what everybody else did, and then found out there wasn't everybody else. So we hired a company called Eco-Kare, and they gave us some guidelines, a map of how we could tackle this problem. But there wasn't a lot of project that we could shamelessly copy. So we started in 2006, we started installing fencing, and we put in artificial nest mounds because we were realizing by blocking the turtles' movement, we were also depriving them of access to places where they could nest. So we put in some nest mounds until we could get these coverts put in. We continued installing fencing and monitoring. We monitored the road mortality throughout the project. And by 2010, we had over 4,000 meters of fencing installed. We began an environmental assessment process for installing the culverts. And our monitoring found we've already reduced the road mortality reptiles by 50% just by having the fencing in place. So it can be done. And we're talking 3.5, the causeway is 3.5 kilometers long. So it's quite a distance to be building these types of structures. So we continued working through, one of the hardest parts was getting the approvals. Working in an environmentally sensitive area made it very difficult. We had to do total environmental assessments and numerous other studies and approvals to go forward. So we finally got to the point in 2012 where we could install one aquatic culvert, 2 terrestrial culverts, and connecting fencing. One of the other goals of the project was to reconnect the Long Point Bay with the marsh. There had been some bridges along the causeway when they fell into disrepair. They was filled in the waterways, and that landlocked the marsh, and that was detrimental to the habitat that these creatures need. So we put in 3 different culverts and then started monitoring them. Maintaining the fencing was an annual job. I mean, the cowboys used to ride the line, right? Because the fence with a hole in it isn't worth having. So the same thing with turtle fencing. So you have to keep doing that. We installed 5 more culverts in 2014, a second large culvert in 15, and then a third aquatic culvert and 2 more terrestrial culverts. We're a total of 12 culverts across the entire causeway. And we had to do 12 is because studies have shown that a turtle will only go 75 meters in one direction before he or she gives up. So you have to space them 120 to 150 meters apart. If you have this much road, that's how many passengers you need to do the job. So we installed different types of fencing. As you can see, Kari pointed out this geotextile fencing, which was easiest to install in the marsh. It's buried 10 inches in the ground, so the animals can't dig under it. We tried the Ministry of Transportation fencing. The wrong button. That's this one where they use the galvanized hardware cloth. Well, that didn't last too long in the marsh. After about 2 years, it was all rusted away to nothing. So I collaborated with somebody doing work with frogs in BC, and she'd been experimenting with aquaculture netting. And so I called up this fishing supply company in Nova Scotia and said, "Can you send me some aquaculture netting for turtle fencing?" We thought it was the craziest thing you ever heard, but it worked great because it didn't rust, and it was small. It had to be, you mentioned, it had to be an 1/8 of an inch mesh, because snakes can't back up. If they go through the fence, they can't get back out. So you have to make it small enough they don't get caught. And then we eventually started using the Nanomax fencing, which is the first really purpose-designed fencing for wildlife, particularly small wildlife that's on the market. All this other stuff is kind of improvised solutions. This gives you a sense of the scale of the number of culverts. That's in the middle here is the first 3, and then there's the other ones that we put in. These are the large aquatic squares, and then the other ones are the smaller box and open grate culverts. These are the 3 types of culverts. Large, the open grate that Kari mentioned, which is here, and Dinu could talk about those. We also put in some. It's limited in size. It's about, I think, 18 inches across, and then down at one point we have snapping turtles that are bigger than that. So we alternated the open grate culvert with some traditional box culverts, and then the bottom one here is a large aquatic culvert. Big construction. And the causeway is the only road in the Long Point, so we had to keep the road accessible. And also, we had to do the work late in the year. So it was either snow or the culverts. We were doing this very late in the year because summertime is when most people are visiting the point. Creating public awareness is really important for the long game. Okay, not every piece of road in Ontario that's crossed by wildlife deserves what can afford to put in heavy mitigation. So changing people's attitudes to animals on the road is a big part of the story. I mean, and we worked on that from the beginning. So, I mean, simple things like the turtle crossing signs we put in, and we don't leave them up all winter, so they just get blended into the background. They appear magically every spring when the turtles are going to start appearing on the road. We also put this electronic sign on the top of the causeway, everything with messages, caution wildlife crossing, brake for snakes, slow down for turtles, whatever messages we can come up. And then just talk to people about the project and what we're doing, and spreading the word as I am doing here today. This is part of our attitude change. We just developed this poster. And I have copies here, please take them. We had to choose a size and said, what would fit on an average cottage refrigerator? That's the size we chose. But that's the message. These creatures have as much right to be in this environment as we do. I think people have forgotten this. This is theirs. This is where they live. And it's not an inconvenience that they're on the road. They don't know what's a road. They're just going where they have to go in life, right? So that's just the backside of the poster, but it gives you some of the data. We were very fortunate also in one of the local folks that has guys on Long Point did this children's book about her husband's kind of obsessed with adventures rescuing turtles on the road. So she did this book about Johnny and his determination to help turtles across the road. And this little book was sold over 2,000 copies. And these folks go around to do book readings, events around Ontario, and talk about how you can help the turtles get across the road. Monitoring tunnels, Kari used that in this photo in her presentation. We set up these cameras at the culverts to monitor whether the turtles were using them. We found out very quickly that the turtles didn't always show up because they move so slow, they lose that amount of motion. And then we looked at the infrared thing. Well, that's still good because they're the same temperature as the environment. So my students who had to do the road monitoring the cameras had to go through hundreds of photos taken by time-lapse cameras. Now, it was every 5 minutes, and turtles move so slow that you could usually capture them. But we did put a camera on either end of a culvert and monitored that. We had time coding on the bottom. And it took a medium-sized snapping turtle, it's like 9 minutes to get across the road, okay? So you think about that, that's 9 minutes in danger, right? And you get on a busy road, particularly the causeway on a summer weekend, that turtle doesn't have a chance to get across. So we tried different ways of mounting the cameras. There's the frog, which we had an overhead view, and there's a frog coming through one of the open grade culverts. And then all kinds of other critters started showing up and using them. I don't know if these little ducklings went through, but we had all kinds of mammals go through them as well, possums and weasels and mink and different critters, so they could all get through. This picture we call it our light at the end of the tunnel photo, but it does make an important point. The turtles won't go through the tunnels if they can't see the other end. They can't see that it gets through to the other side. So you have to incorporate that in your design and realize that they won't go into it if they think it's just a blind, cave type structure. Because their goal is to move through the habitat, not to hide. So we began in 2008 doing monitoring based on using the same protocols as Canadian Wildlife Service. By 2016, we reduced the road mortality from reptiles from 248 in 2008 to 47. Okay, so that's a drug decline of more than 80%, and that was, in the case of turtles, 89%. So it can work. Driver's awareness still is an important awareness factor, and it's quite common now to see people stopping and either waiting for a turtle to crawl across the road or somebody getting out and carrying a turtle across the road and getting honking and claps from people who were waiting behind them. Years ago, that wouldn't happen. People would be honking their horns and pulling out and stuff, but we basically changed people's attitudes to what, the presence of these animals on the road. So that shows you kind of the decline. That big spike in there is, and this kind of reiterates Kari's point, we had a huge storm right in the middle of the turtle movement period, and it wiped out huge sections of our fencing because we're right along the shoreline, and damaged the fencing, and it just worked out that they were on the move, the fencing was damaged, and they got through, and our numbers spiked right through the roof. They were, again, maintenance of the fencing is absolutely crucial to making sure that the whole system works together. Fundraising over the course of the project, we raised $2.7 million. Most of that from the federal and provincial governments through their habitat, their species risk funding program. Norfolk County's role was actually quite small in terms of the past contribution, but they provided all of the in-kind support. We didn't know about hiring contractors or doing environmental assessments, so they took the lead on all of that. So we worked in partnership with the county, and it was a substantial value to that, additional value to the project. These are the organizations. We even got some money from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Foundation because the wetland complex at Long Point is one of the largest on the Great Lakes. And the Americans, to their credit, recognize that the lakes, the boundaries don't really matter when we're talking about the Great Lakes system, right? So anything you do to make wetlands healthier on either side of the lake is good for the lakes. And other organizations and lots of people in the groups in the community all chipped in what they could. Lessons learned, getting public education awareness is important as the infrastructure changes. Because there's, you're not going to be able to do all these interventions, but if you can change people's attitudes, you can make a big difference to it. Do your homework, go to the monitoring studies that Jonathan's done. They're absolutely crucial because then you'll know where you're starting from and where you can get to. And then also the environmental conditions, because as Kari pointed out, you really have to adapt these things to the specific environment you're in. What may work in one place may not work in another. Like using hardware cloth in a marsh is not a successful strategy. Aquaculture netting works great. I don't like the word eco-passages. It became kind of a bad word. We did get some actually pushback in the community. People saying, "Oh, why are you wasting these money on these turtles? Like, we've been running over them for years. They're still here, so what's the problem?" Well, they said that about the buffalo too, right? So I call them wildlife culverts, and people understand that. Of course, all the little kids, they just call them turtle tunnels. And that's really obvious what they do. The species at risk, it's great, you get funding and stuff, but it's like walking around in a minefield trying to get the permits and the approvals to do anything because they're so afraid that some species of red turtle will be injured during the course of your culvert construction or something. So it can be a real process. I think the regulatory agencies are now more familiar with these types of projects, so it may be easier, but we were the first guys through and they were, what the heck are you doing? At one point, actually, we were doing environmental assessment, trying to prove to the Ministry of Natural Resources that the culverts would work. And I got a call from an engineering firm down here in Windsor saying, Ministry of Natural Resources has told us to put in one of these echo passages. We don't know what the heck that is. You guys know. And I said, wait a minute, they told you to do it? And I said, I'm begging them to give me permission to do it. And it's the same guys, right? Monitoring is crucial for improving effectiveness and adaptive management, make improvements. And we've got to recognize there's no easy or cheap way to do this properly. Like anything else in life, your results are basically depend on you doing it the right way and making the investment up front to get the results. Thank you.
Okay, so our last speaker before we get to the panel discussion part. Dinu Filip. Dinu is a civil engineer by education with a major in drainage structures and a licensed professional engineer in the province of Ontario. He graduated from the Technical University of Construction in Bucharest, Romania in 1994. For over 4 years, he worked as a consultant in the roads and bridges design field. Between 2001 and 2006, Dinu was a structural designer for Peter Sheffield and Associates in Toronto, responsible for structural design of various types of buildings using several FEA finite element analysis software. Since 2006, he's worked for ACO Canada, a manufacturing company in the field of drainage and water management. He's here with us this evening. Thank you for being with us, Peter.
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this event, and I'm so impressed that so many people have an interest in this subject, and I think it's a subject that needs more attention than it receives, and for reasons that you've already seen from the other speakers. I don't have many slides. Just a little bit of who is ACO? What is this company? Well, it's a German company with representation, international representation. It has a subsidiary in Ontario that was incorporated in 2006, and it's a specialist in drainage and water management products. It's a company that designs, develops, and manufactures its own products. And the two fields of the business are stormwater management, surface water management, everything outside the building. And one of the strengths of the company is what we call linear drainage or trench drains. And this is how the ACO got connected to these wildlife culverts that we're going to see in the next slides. Also building drainage, any drainage from the roof to the basement and inside the building is something that the company will be involved with. So ACO Wildlife is the brand name of the products that ACO manufactures and are aimed at wildlife protection, and they again the connection is the expertise in linear drainage and tunnels and channels with the grate on top, and the interest of the owner. I was started involved with this subject in the mid-1980s, and there was an evolution since then with this type of product that we manufacture. What is the problem? The problem is that these little creatures, and again, the products that ACO manufactures are aimed at small creatures, amphibians, reptiles, not mammals, not large animals or birds or anything like that. So it's a relatively narrow scope of work, if we can say that. But the problem is that in these habitats, these animals, they move between different spots because of their lives. Winter habitats, spawning grounds, and stuff like that. So suddenly we come and build a road that separates these two areas. So they migrate over the road on the other side twice a year, typically spring and autumn. And another aspect of it is when they do that, they don't do one individual here, one individual there. In some instances, the road gets covered with these little animals. So when a car passes, it's a massacre, and that's something that it comes down to our sensibilities, and it's something that is not pleasant at all. It's not pleasant to see at all. So this is the current product, current tunnel, or wildlife tunnel, as Rick called it, that ACO manufactures, and it has a certain features. Well, first of all, it's 500 millimeter wide clear width inside the tunnel, 300 millimeter tall, and it comes in 1 meter long modules. This 1 meter long module, you put it together to create a longer tunnel. depending on how wide the road is or what is the width of road that needs to be spanned. The shorter, the better. Like, you know, very long tunnels are very difficult for any kind of creatures to use. It's made of polymer concrete material. Not a material that many people will be familiar with is a cement concrete, but instead of cement, it uses, it's like cement concrete, but instead of cement, it uses a resin, which gives a much higher strength to the material itself, so you don't need very big, bulky products to achieve the same kind of strength as you do with cement concrete. And the material is insensitive to salt, freezing, hydrocarbons, any kind of elements that you know, we can see in a normal road application. And very importantly as well, especially in our climate, is snowplow friendly. So when in contact with snowplow blades, it doesn't break the snowplow and it doesn't collapse. We chip it. In some way, it's just like cement concrete. I have a picture to show you what happens with it after years being in a road. The features that are relevant, and I use the same picture that you use, Rick. I think I have it from you, or somehow. There are certain features about this tunnel that makes it, you know, interesting for these little creatures. And one is the holes on the top. Those holes are very important because they allow natural light inside the tunnel. And some of these creatures, you know, the amount of light in the tunnel is very important to make them go through the tunnel, to not being afraid to enter the tunnel. And there are some studies I did from the University of Massachusetts that show that even artificial light have a positive impact and make them use the tunnel. Moisture access inside the tunnel through the openings is important as well. Maintain the outside temperature. I think Kari mentioned that you know, the large difference in temperature between inside of the tunnel and outside will make the creatures not entering it. Non-metallic. Non-metallic has two aspects. One is the magnetic orientation of some creatures that may be disoriented in the presence of this metal tunnel. And another aspect is some creatures, like the salamanders, if they crawl on a metal surface, their belly gets dry and they die. So that's not good for that reason. They are made of non-toxic inert material, no volatile organic compounds released from the polymer concrete, and they are pretty shallow. So 300 millimeter inside it, they're about 500 millimeter total height. 300 clear height, 500 total height. Why is that important? Because in many road applications, you don't have a lot of depth to work with. If the road is not much higher than the surrounding area, you know, and you put something that is deeper, then you create a low point in this tunnel that eventually will fill with water in any storm event and make it less for some creatures. So that is important as well. Here are some installations in Canada for this tunnel. All of them are the larger tunnel, the current version, which is 500 millimeter wide. But here you see a narrower one. This was the original version. It was only 200 millimeter width, and it's not manufactured anymore just because it was concluded that 200 millimeter is not enough. For it's just very limiting for what can go or would use it in terms of animals. And the reason I put it here is because this was installed in the 1990s in Quebec, in the Levick, Vermont area, and it's on a road that is it has a very high intense traffic and heavy traffic, and this is how it looks after. 20 years, I think this picture was taken 2 years ago. So this is what I meant about the polymer concrete working with the snow plows and the traffic and stuff. It doesn't break, it just gets chipped away to stay in place for a long time. In terms of installation of this tunnel, there are two main methods. One that I show you there is basically is creating a mortar base, and the tunnels are laid down on the bed, and then you pour on the sides. And the other way is suspending. Many of this will be in retrofit applications. If there is a road and they are putting a tunnel in later, and this is suspended from the top, so the tunnel will stay in the air, and then we pour concrete around them. In the final installation, the tunnel will be in a concrete surround. That is a must. So you can't just put it in dirt by itself. It needs this concrete to achieve its design strength. And it's always a good idea to have reinforcement in this concrete. Concrete is a material that doesn't have any tensile strength, so it cracks and it may start moving away, especially in cold climates, freeze-thaw cycles and stuff like that. So reinforcement to keep it all together is a good idea. And it can come to the surface, or you can stop it just below the surface for aesthetic reasons. The strongest installation will be the concrete to the top though. As the other speakers mentioned, these tunnels or any kind of passage will not work without a guiding fence, because animals don't know that they need to go to the tunnel and pass there safely under the road. They will pass the road wherever they reach it. So you need a guiding fence to prevent them crossing the road everywhere and guide them to the locations of the tunnels. And this guiding fence is what ACO manufactures. It has an entrance, which is this one here, and the entrance basically is an adapter that connects the fence to the tunnel in an easy way. And the fence is 400 millimeter high and has ribs for strength. It's made of polyethylene, and it's what we call a one-way fence. It's curved towards the landscape and away from the road. And I'll go to the next slide to show how this works. So basically your road will be on that side of the fence. So a creature that somehow ends up in the road can move back into the safe zone on this side, but it cannot move from here on the other side. So I said that this fence is about 400 millimeter tall. It's not meant to stop larger animals or any kind of mammals or anything like that. It's meant for small creatures, amphibian reptiles, small snakes and stuff like that. It's meant not to, disrupt the ecosystems in ways that it's not designed for. It's just for what it's. And here you see some installations of this fence in an application. I also put the picture here that came to my attention this year. I haven't seen it before. A failure of the fence, and it's an application where it was close to the road, and it was a lot of snow that was pushed by the snow plows on top of the fence, and it was interesting.
That was minus 30-degree weather and a massive snowstorm.
Again, it's part of our learning, like the learning process for us as well. And I think like what would be the solution for that, and I think more costs would be something that may have helped to provide more support. There are a number of studies from various sources like University of Alberta, Massachusetts, Ontario Road Ecology, Ministry of Conservation Ontario, Toronto Region Conservation Authority, that are locations where the products or various type of products were installed, not only an aqua tunnel but other concrete culverts or pipes or other things. And there is a fair amount of information in terms of what works and what doesn't, and recommendations from these sources. And just to, in my experience, Just to wrap it up in just a few sentences. Tunnels less than 0.5 millimeters wide are not recommended. We had this experience that the smaller tunnel was used to be manufactured. If you use more than 0.5 meters, 1 meter pipe would work, but anything that is less than 1 meter in diameter is good to have openings on the top to allow moisture, light, balance the temperature inside the tunnel, and so that when you have larger structures, that becomes less important just because it's more air, so it's more light that you can get through the ends of the structure inside the tunnel. Metal tunnels not recommended for the reasons I mentioned. And in terms of guiding fence, one-way fencing allow the creatures back to the safety zone if they ended up on the wrong side of the fence. No metal fencing within magnetic orientation of animals, and no see-through fencing either, like the Ontario type fence. Amphibians, reptiles try to get to the fence if they see through, and that's not a good thing. So, thank you very much.